A quiet love. When Anthony first walked into my restaurant, he didn't strike me as someone who would change my life. He wore plain clothes and had that polite government employee smile, the kind you see often but forget just as quickly. But something about his quiet nature stayed with me. He was alone, and unlike the other customers, he didn't look at his phone. He took in the food, the place, and the silence like it meant something to him. It was unusual. Maybe that's why I noticed him. Or maybe it was because, in a life filled with noise, orders, plates, bills, staff, he didn't add to the chaos. He just sat with it. He came back the next week, and then the one after that. I didn't know what he saw in my food or in me. I wasn't loud or overly warm. I just ran a small restaurant, kept things tidy, and paid my taxes. Maybe he liked the predictability. Maybe he liked that I didn't ask too many questions. It started with brief hellos and a smile. Then he brought me pastries one rainy afternoon. Nothing grand, just a box of warm bread wrapped with sincerity. From there, things unraveled in the gentlest way. He told me he worked for the government, something about records and documents. "It's a quiet job," he said. "I like quiet." So did I. When he asked to court me, he did so without flair. No grand speeches, just one evening over leftover soup and closed curtains. "If you'd let me, I'd like to take this seriously," he said. I nodded. There was no need for fanfare when the intent was real. Months passed, and our quiet turned into comfort. Then came the day he asked if I'd come meet his family. The day I met his mother, Alma, I remember feeling a small tug inside my chest, that quiet alarm that goes off not in words but in weight. She greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, the kind of smile that assessed, calculated. She looked me over quickly. "So you're the one cooking my son meals now?" she said, half laughing. I told her I was glad to finally meet her. "I can see why you keep him fed," she added. "You look simple, thrifty, I suppose." "That's good." But the way she said it didn't feel like praise. It felt like something laced in comparison. Their home was modest. His father, Carlos, was kind enough but distant. He didn't say much beyond the usual polite nods. He looked tired. Not in the physical sense. In the way a man looks when he's spent his life following orders and forgetting how to lead his own. Then there was Marco, Anthony's older brother. Flashy watch, loud laugh, an entrepreneur who liked to say, "Business is booming," without ever mentioning what kind of business it was. His wife, Bea, wore expensive makeup and even more expensive perfume. She greeted me with warm cheeks and practiced kindness, but she didn't listen when I spoke. Bea talked about skincare and trips, how she rewarded herself for the stress of working a job she never quite described. The moment she saw my plain clothes, I saw the shift in her posture, the way some women lean just slightly back when they think you don't belong at their table. The youngest brother, Martin, barely spoke. Still in school, more interested in his phone than in the family lunch we were forced to smile through. But Anthony, he stayed close, held my hand beneath the table like an anchor. After our wedding, life became heavier. We lived simply. I still managed the restaurant, and Anthony worked his quiet job. We didn't chase anything extravagant. We were content, or at least I tried to be. But Alma, she wasn't satisfied. It started with small things, asking Anthony to run errands for her during work hours, requesting money for repairs that never happened. Then it grew bolder. She began asking me, always with a sweet tone, "Belle, can I borrow a little, just until next week?" "Belle, it's just a small thing. Don't worry, I always return what I borrow." But she never did. At first, I didn't keep track. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to be the kind of daughter-in-law that families welcomed. But after the fifth, then sixth time, I started counting. And each time I reminded her, the tone shifted. "Oh, Belle, I thought you weren't the type to count every coin. How particular of you." I never raised my voice. I didn't know how. I only swallowed the bitterness. Then B joined the act. Her requests were bigger, large sums for emergency travel or important opportunities. She spoke in vague terms but urgent tones. I told Anthony. He didn't want to get in between his mother and his wife. "She means well," he said once. "She just doesn't always know how to ask." But it wasn't asking. It was taking. And the more I gave, the more they twisted my silence into permission. One day I finally asked B, gently, if she could start returning even just a portion of what she owed. She left me on scene. A few hours later, I was blocked. Just like that. No explanation, no apology, just erased. And I knew then she never intended to pay anything back, because to her, I wasn't a sister-in-law. I was a resource, a walking wallet in plain clothes. And Alma? She pretended not to know anything. She started calling Anthony more frequently, especially when she knew we were trying to save. She'd say things like, "You know I only have you. Marco is too busy. And Belle, well, Belle is a little tight-fisted, isn't she?" It hurt. But what hurt more was that Anthony never corrected her. I started pulling back, not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I stopped opening my wallet, stopped responding to vague messages. I started saying, "I'm sorry, I can't," and then walking away. That's when the rumors began. I heard from a distant cousin that Alma was calling me selfish, that I was rude and entitled, that I was poisoning Anthony's mind. B made cryptic posts on social media, the kind that made people wonder who she was talking about, but we both knew it was about me. Funny how the people who owed the most were always the loudest when you stopped giving. But I stayed silent. Because silence, I had learned, could be a form of survival. If you made it all the way here, I just want to say, you matter, and your time means a lot to me. Let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from? I'd love to hear from you, wherever you are in the world. Your support keeps this storytelling space alive. The weight of obligation. Belle had always believed that love meant showing up, not just during celebrations, but especially in moments when silence grew loud, when words failed, and when effort spoke louder than any promise. She married Anthony with the belief that their quiet kind of love, forged in honesty and mutual respect, would be enough. But nothing could have prepared her for the kind of loyalty that demanded blind tolerance instead of truth. It started small. A few weeks after the wedding, Belle noticed how Anthony always paused before answering a call from his mother. He'd tilt his head slightly as if bracing himself. His tone, usually calm, would turn tight, clipped. And then, always, the sigh afterward. "She just needed something small," he would say, brushing it off. "Mama gets anxious sometimes." But Belle noticed the pattern. Alma never called to say hello or check in out of love. There was always a reason. A favor. A request. And more often than not, it involved money. At first, Belle didn't question it. Anthony loved his family. She admired that about him. But as months passed, the small amounts grew. His brother Martin's tuition, the repairs to the family's old van, medication for Alma's migraines, a late payment for Carlos's utilities. And somehow it was always Anthony's responsibility. She admired her husband's devotion, but it came at a cost. Belle began budgeting more tightly at the restaurant. She cut back on personal expenses, no more spa visits, fewer deliveries, more time in the kitchen herself. Every cent mattered. She never complained, not out loud, but each time Anthony handed over money, she felt something in her quietly tighten. She never wanted to come between him and his family, but it felt like Alma didn't just take space. She consumed it. Then came B. Belle had tried. She really had. She invited B to brunch once, hoping to connect. B arrived an hour late, reeking of perfume, her phone glued to her hand. "Sorry, had to drop by the salon," B said, barely apologetic. "This new facial treatment? Magic. You should try it." Belle smiled politely. "I've been cutting back lately, trying to manage things carefully." Bea chuckled, swiping on her screen. "Girl, we're not meant to just survive. We should enjoy life. You only live once." The conversation ended there. It always did. When Bea asked to borrow money, Belle hesitated. Anthony said it was only temporary. Bea promised to pay it back next month. She never did. Worse, she began to avoid Belle, ignored messages, missed calls. And one day, Belle opened her phone to find herself blocked on every platform. No explanation, no acknowledgement, just silence. Anthony was apologetic, but distant. "I'll talk to her," he said, but nothing ever changed. Alma, on the other hand, was growing bolder. When Belle refused to give more money one month, politely, even apologetically, Alma's demeanor shifted. Sweetness drained from her voice like sugar from a bitter cup. "You know," Alma said one Sunday over lunch, "some people act generous, but deep down, they're just selfish. Especially the ones who keep track of every peso." Belle felt her throat close. She knew who Alma meant. Anthony said nothing. His silence hurt more than Alma's words. Belle tried to hold on to what she could control: the restaurant, her small garden, her quiet mornings before the world stirred. But even peace began to feel borrowed. She saw the way Alma praised Bea in public, the posts, the compliments. "My stylish daughter-in-law," she called her, "always thoughtful, always family." Yet behind closed doors, Bea owed thousands. Alma borrowed like it was her birthright, and Belle was expected to endure it in silence. The final straw came when Belle's bank flagged an unusually large withdrawal, a check Anthony had written without telling her. It was for Martin's graduation gift, a new tablet. Alma had insisted it was important for school, but Belle knew the truth. The boy didn't even attend his online classes regularly. That night, Belle sat alone in the restaurant's office. She stared at the ledger, numbers bleeding into each other. Her fingers trembled slightly over her calculator, but it wasn't the math that made her feel faint. It was the realization that she had become a provider for a family that didn't even see her. Not as a partner, not as a daughter-in-law, not even as a person. Just a source. She closed the ledger and leaned back in her chair. For the first time since their wedding, Belle allowed herself to admit what she'd tried so hard to deny. Love could not survive where boundaries were mocked and silence was weaponized. And in this family, silence was its own language, spoken fluently by those who demanded everything but gave nothing in return. The breaking point. Belle used to believe that when love was real, truly real, it would shield you from the worst of life, that with Anthony's quiet presence, his gentle eyes, and the home they built side by side, they could outlast anything. But now, that silence she once mistook for peace, it felt like drowning, and the weight of everything she'd been forced to carry, the debts, the betrayal, the false smiles, had begun to hollow her out from the inside, quietly, invisibly, until her soul felt like scaffolding around someone who used to dream. Anthony hadn't shouted, he hadn't cheated, he just disappeared without leaving. He still came home each night, still kissed her forehead like it was muscle memory, still called her love like it meant something. But Belle could feel it, that vacant calm, that numbness where warmth used to live. A man present in body, but absent in everything that mattered. She tried not to think of Alma, but how could she not? The woman who wrapped poison in politeness, who played the victim so masterfully, she convinced half the family that Belle had changed, become arrogant, cold, undeserving. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her whispers did the damage just fine. Bea was worse, shameless, spent what wasn't hers, then vanished behind a block button like a coward. No explanation, no apology, just gone. Like Belle's trust had been an inconvenience. And Anthony? He said nothing. He watched it all happen, let it all slide, and in doing so, he told Belle exactly where she stood, not beside him, beneath. One night, with the sun bleeding across their living room and shadows clinging to the floor, Belle stood by the window, her reflection fractured by the glass. Anthony sat on the couch, scrolling, always scrolling, as if life existed somewhere in the screen and not across from him. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. "I don't think your mother ever liked me," she said softly, "and I'm starting to wonder if that ever mattered to you." Anthony looked up, confused, caught off guard. "What are you talking about?" Belle's voice trembled, not with weakness, but restraint. "I bent over backwards for your family. I held us together when it should have been you, and the one time I needed you to protect me, you disappeared." He stood up, defensive. "You know I appreciate you." "I'm not asking to be appreciated," she said, almost in a whisper. "I'm asking to be seen." He opened his mouth, but silence once again answered for him. That was the night something in her finally broke. Not loudly, not with drama, but quietly, in the way a rope gives after years of strain. And that kind of break? You don't always hear it, but you feel it. She didn't pack a suitcase that night, didn't storm out. That kind of exit would have been too easy, too obvious. Instead, she disappeared in 1,000 quiet ways. She stopped explaining. She stopped asking. She stopped waiting for a love that didn't fight for her. And in that stillness, she began to come back to herself. Weeks passed. The rumors kept spreading. Bea never unblocked her. Anthony never changed. And Alma? Still playing her role like a veteran actress in a drama she controlled, wide-eyed and wounded, always the victim. But Belle was done being part of the script. She poured her strength back into her restaurant, her fire, herself. She reconnected with old friends, took walks alone, smiled without permission, cried without shame. Until one day, a message arrived, an old friend offering a partnership, a chance to start fresh, a business in another province, a place where no one knew her name, or Alma's, or Bea's, or Anthony's ghosts. She paused for only a moment. Then she said yes. Not to escape, to be reborn. Months later, Anthony would sit in the echo of their empty apartment, staring at the closet she once filled, with her dresses, her scent, her softness, and he would finally ask the question he should have asked long ago: when did I lose her? But he already knew. He lost her the moment he stayed silent, when he chose comfort over courage, family pride over partnership, his mother's whispers over Belle's voice. He didn't cheat, he didn't yell, but indifference can kill love just as surely as betrayal. Belle never looked back, not once, because the woman who once begged to be heard had learned that peace doesn't come when others change. It comes when you change, when you finally stop apologizing for your strength, when you choose yourself, even if your voice shakes. And as she stood at the doorway of her new life, suitcase in one hand, coffee in the other, the morning sun on her face, she didn't cry. She breathed. For the first time in years, she was free. What grew in the silence. The hardest part wasn't leaving. It was realizing how long she had stayed, hoping, shrinking, excusing, just to keep the peace in a home that no longer felt like hers. Belle didn't leave with fury. She left with truth. And when she did, it wasn't to punish, prove, or escape. It was to begin again, on her own terms. The town she moved to didn't know her history. They didn't whisper about loans or loyalty or in-laws. They just knew her as Belle. And somehow, that was more than enough. She planted herbs on her windowsill. She no longer rushed to check her phone at every beep. She cooked with joy again, laughed, rested, and let her silence become a sanctuary, not a sentence. Her cafe was modest, just a few wooden tables, the smell of fresh bread, and her name on the sign. But inside, it was filled with something priceless: peace. The kind that's built, not given. One morning, while wiping down her countertop, Belle caught her reflection in the window. She looked different, not in appearance but in energy, steadier, lighter, as if the weight she'd carried all those years had quietly slipped off her shoulders the moment she stopped waiting for someone else to lift it. Thank you so much for watching this story. If you made it all the way here, I just want to say, you matter, and your time means a lot to me. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? I'd love to hear from you. If this story spoke to you, please consider liking, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell so you won't miss the next one. Until next time, stay kind to yourself.